I worked 2 jobs to pay for my brother's college. At his graduation, he thanked everyone who believed in me, except me, so I walked out. The air in the university auditorium was thick and sweet, a cloying mix of wilting floral arrangements, cheap hairspray, and the collective body heat of 1,000 proud, sweating families. It smelled like achievement, or maybe just polyester. I was sitting in the 12th row, my back aching from a metal folding chair that had been designed with zero regard for the human spine. My good dress, the one I'd bought on clearance and saved for this exact day, felt tight across my shoulders. Every muscle was coiled with a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. For 4 years, this moment had been the sun on my horizon, the singular point of light I had crawled toward through double shifts, sleepless nights, and a diet that consisted primarily of instant noodles and lukewarm coffee. My brother Leo was on stage. He looked impossibly polished in his cap and gown, the gold valedictorian sash draped over his shoulders like a mark of destiny. He was glowing. From my seat, I could see the confident set of his jaw, the easy smile he offered the dean who was introducing him. That was my Leo. Always charming, always bright, always the one destined for greatness. And I, his older sister, was his launch pad. I was the solid ground from which he could soar. That was the deal we'd made, unspoken but absolute. The day our parents died and left us with nothing but a mountain of debt and each other. I was 20, he was 17. I would work, he would study. I would build the foundation, and he would build the future. The dean finished his flowery introduction, and a wave of polite applause rippled through the hall. Leo stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had never doubted he belonged in the spotlight, and cleared his throat. The crowd hushed. I leaned forward, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. This was it, the culmination, the justification for every sacrifice, every missed party, every lonely holiday spent scrubbing floors or waiting tables. "Thank you, Dean Morris," Leo began, his voice smooth and resonant, filling the cavernous space. "Faculty, esteemed guests, fellow graduates, and loving families." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the sea of faces. I felt a flutter in my chest, a desperate childish need for his gaze to find mine, to share this. He looked out over the crowd, his expression one of profound, humble gratitude. "They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm here to tell you it takes a universe to get a graduate through 4 years of organic chemistry." A ripple of appreciative laughter. He had them in the palm of his hand. He always did. He continued, speaking of shared memories, late-night study sessions, and the bonds forged in the crucible of academia. It was a good speech, a great speech. It was eloquent, funny, and touching. I felt my throat tighten with pride. My brother, I did this. We did this. Then he got to the thank yous. He thanked Professor Albright for seeing his potential. He thanked his roommate Josh for the coffee and the camaraderie. He thanked his girlfriend Tiffany for her unwavering support and for proofreading his thesis at 3 in the morning. Each name was a little stone dropped into the quiet pool of my heart. I waited. "But most of all," he said, his voice cracking with perfectly modulated emotion, "I have to thank my family, my support system, the people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." He paused, and the silence in the auditorium was absolute. My breath caught in my throat. "Here it comes. I want to thank our Aunt Carol," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. My stomach dropped. Aunt Carol? She'd sent him a $20 check for his birthday once, tucked inside a card that got his name wrong. "For always reminding me to reach for the stars," he continued. "And our Uncle Mark, for his wisdom and guidance." Uncle Mark had taken Leo fishing twice and spent the entire time complaining about the government. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My hands, which had been clasped in my lap, were now cold and slick with sweat. This was a bit, a joke. He was building up to the grand finale. To me, he had to be. "And of course," Leo's voice swelled, "I have to thank my parents. Even though they're not here, I know they're watching. They are the reason I am who I am. Their memory has been my guiding light, my inspiration. This is for them." He looked up at the ceiling, a single perfect tear tracing a path down his cheek. The audience melted. A collective sigh of sympathy and admiration washed over the room, and that was it. He wrapped up his speech with a flourish, a call to action for his fellow graduates to go out and change the world. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. People were dabbing their eyes. The woman next to me, a mother bursting with pride for her own graduate, turned to me with a beaming, tear-streaked face. "Isn't that just beautiful?" she whispered. "What a wonderful young man." I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. It was as if the air had been sucked out of my lungs, replaced by a cold, heavy lump of lead. He hadn't said my name. He had thanked our dead parents, a deadbeat uncle, and an aunt who barely knew he existed. He had thanked his girlfriend of 6 months. He had thanked a professor, but he had not thanked me. The person who had worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs to pay his tuition. The person who had packed him lunches, washed his clothes, and proofread his essays before Tiffany was ever in the picture. The person who had given up her own dreams of college, of a life, so that he could have his. I was not a part of his universe. I was not even a part of his village. I was just the dirt he'd scraped off his shoes before stepping onto the stage. The applause was a deafening roar, a physical force that seemed to press down on me, pinning me to my chair. He was still on stage, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, bathing in the warm glow of adoration. He didn't even glance in my direction. He hadn't looked for me once. Something inside me, a tightly wound spring I hadn't even known was there, finally snapped. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, disconnected from my body. The woman next to me gave me a confused look. I ignored her. I turned my back on the stage, on the celebration, on my brilliant, beautiful, treacherous brother. I started walking up the aisle. Each step was an act of will. Left, right, left, right. I kept my eyes fixed on the double doors at the back of the auditorium, the glowing red exit sign a beacon in the dim light. I didn't run. I walked with a strange, deliberate calm. The sound of my own footsteps on the carpeted floor was swallowed by the ovation. No one noticed. I was invisible. I had always been invisible. I had just been too stupid, too full of blind, sisterly love to realize it. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunlight of the hallway. The door swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of the applause, and in the sudden, echoing silence, I finally allowed myself to shatter. I found an empty women's restroom and locked myself in a stall, pressing my forehead against the cool, graffiti-scarred metal. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too vast for tears. It was a hollow, aching emptiness that spread from my chest through my entire body. It was a physical sensation, like I'd been gutted. For 4 years, I'd told myself a story. We were a team. We were survivors. We were in this together. But it had all been a lie. I was the only one who had ever believed it. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Aunt Carol. Leo was so wonderful. We are all so proud. See you at the restaurant. The restaurant. The celebratory lunch I had arranged and paid for. The reservation for 12 at a fancy Italian place Leo had chosen. The one with the white tablecloths and the $3 sign rating on Yelp. The one I'd had to take an extra catering shift to afford. The irony was so bitter it felt like poison on my tongue. I took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened up. I looked at my reflection in the small, cloudy mirror above the sink. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark. The person staring back at me was a stranger, a fool, a doormat, a ghost at her own brother's feast. And in that moment, something shifted. The hollowness began to fill with something else. Something hot and hard and sharp. Rage. I left the restroom and walked out of the university building, not looking back. I went to the parking lot, got into my 10-year-old Honda with a dented fender, and drove. I didn't go to the restaurant. I just drove. I turned off my phone. Let them wonder. Let them call. Let them realize for the first time in 4 years that I wasn't where they expected me to be. Hours later, after the sun had set and the anger had cooled to a hard, cold resolve, I went home to the small apartment we had shared until he'd moved into the dorms. The apartment I still paid for. His room was exactly as he'd left it for the summer, a shrine to his achievements, trophies on the shelves, framed certificates on the wall. I walked into the room and began to pack. Not for him, for me. The confrontation happened around midnight. I was taping up the last box of my belongings when I heard a key in the lock. The door opened and there he was, my golden brother, still wearing his graduation suit. Though the tie was loosened and his hair was slightly mussed, he was flanked by our Uncle Mark and Aunt Carol. They all looked furious. "There you are!" Aunt Carol snapped, her voice shrill. "We have been calling you for hours. What on earth is wrong with you? You embarrassed us. You embarrassed Leo on his big day." Leo didn't say anything. He just stood there, leaning against the door frame, watching me with a look of bored irritation. It was the look you'd give a dog that had chewed up your favorite shoes. "I'm busy, Carol," I said, my voice flat. I didn't look at her. I just kept my focus on the packing tape, pulling a fresh strip and sealing the box with a loud, satisfying rip. "What is all this?" Uncle Mark demanded, gesturing at the boxes stacked in the living room. "You're moving? It looks that way, doesn't it?" I said. Finally, Leo spoke. "What is your problem?" he asked, his voice laced with the same condescending weariness he used when explaining a simple concept to someone he considered slow. "So, you walked out of my graduation. You made your little dramatic scene. Are you done now? Because you ruined the lunch." Everyone was worried. "Worried?" I laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You weren't worried. You were annoyed that your ATM had wandered off. That got a reaction. A flicker of something, anger maybe, or surprise in his eyes. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your speech, Leo," I said, finally turning to face him. I let my eyes sweep over all three of them. The self-proclaimed support system. "The one where you thanked everyone in the entire world except the person who actually paid for the stage you were standing on." Aunt Carol scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, is that what this is about? Your name wasn't mentioned? You're that petty?" "It's not about my name," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's about the erasure. It's about 4 years of my life. Gone. It's about every 17-hour day, every meal I skipped, every single thing I gave up so he could stand on that stage. And for him to act like it never happened, like he did it all on his own, with the memory of our parents and a $20 check from you, that's not petty. That's monstrous." Leo pushed himself off the doorframe and took a step into the room. He was smiling, but it was a cold reptilian smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're being hysterical." "Am I?" I asked. "Am I hysterical, Leo? Or am I just finally seeing clearly?" And then he did something I never could have predicted. He dropped the act. The charming, grateful golden boy persona fell away, and I was left staring at the stranger underneath. "You want to know the truth?" he said, his voice dropping to a low, confessional murmur. The smile was gone. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Fine. You want gratitude? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being so naive. Thank you for being so desperate to be a martyr that you never once stopped to ask any real questions." I stared at him, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. Uncle Mark and Aunt Carol looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. They had come here for a family drama, not this cold, surgical dissection. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "The tuition," he said, ticking the points off on his fingers as if explaining a business plan. "Did you ever look at the actual bursar's statements? Or did you just accept the numbers I wrote down on a napkin for you. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. You just dutifully deposited the money into my account every month, whatever I asked for. So trusting, so noble. Leo, stop, Uncle Mark said, his voice weak. Leo ignored him. His eyes were locked on mine. I had a scholarship, sis, a big one. Full ride for academics, starting sophomore year. The university was basically paying me to be here. The room tilted. I had to put a hand on a stack of boxes to steady myself. A full ride. For 3 years. 3 years of double shifts. 3 years of scrimping and saving and starving. For nothing. The money? I asked, my voice barely a croak. The money I sent you? Oh, I put it to good use, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Investments. A new car, the one I told you Josh's dad helped me get. A couple of really great spring break trips to Cancun. You'd be amazed how far an extra $4,000 a month goes when your basic living expenses are already covered, he smirked. So yeah, thanks. You were a great investor. Unwitting, but great. This was the moment. The true inciting betrayal. Not the omission in the speech, but the cold, calculated confession that followed. This was his villain monologue, delivered not with regret, but with a gloating, contemptuous pride. He wasn't just ungrateful, he was a thief. He had stolen my money, my time, my life, and he was proud of it. Aunt Carol looked horrified. Uncle Mark looked like he was going to be sick, but I just looked at my brother, the boy I had raised, the man I had created, and I felt nothing. The love, the pride, the hurt. It was all gone, burned away by the cold fire of his confession. All that was left was a vast, empty wasteland. Get out, I said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 4 years of stolen life. This is my apartment too, he sneered, though his bravado was starting to fade. He hadn't expected this. He had expected tears, shouting, a scene he could control and manipulate. He hadn't expected this dead, chilling calm. Not anymore, I said. The lease is in my name. The furniture is mine. The air you are breathing is paid for by me. You have 60 seconds to get out of my sight before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Uncle Mark, to his credit, seemed to finally grasp the gravity of the situation. He grabbed Leo's arm. Let's go, son. We're leaving. This isn't over, Leo hissed at me as Mark pulled him toward the door. Oh, I know, I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. We're just getting started. They left. The door slammed shut, and I was alone again in the wreckage of my life. But this time the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a singular, crystal clear purpose. He thought it was over. He thought he had won. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had just woken a sleeping dragon, and I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. The day after the graduation, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The rage was still there, a hot coal in my stomach, but it wasn't chaotic. It was focused. It was fuel. My first call was not to a therapist or a friend. It was to my place of work, both of them. I called the diner where I'd worked the morning shift for 4 years and told them I was taking a leave of absence. Then I called the catering company where I worked nights and weekends and did the same. For the first time since I was 20 years old, I had nowhere to be. The feeling was terrifying and liberating all at once. My second call was to Uncle Mark. He answered on the first ring, his voice tentative. Hello? It's me, I said. I need to know whose side you're on. Right now. No hesitation. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I heard Aunt Carol's voice in the background, sharp and questioning. He shushed her. Your side, he said finally, his voice firm. God, kid, I had no idea. What he said, what he admitted to, that was, I'm on your side. Good, I said, because I'm going to need your help. Anything, he said, and I believed him. He wasn't a strong man, my Uncle Mark, but he was a decent one. He had been shocked into action. What do you need? I need a witness, I said, and I need a lawyer. Mark knew a guy. Of course he did. A guy from his bowling league who had a daughter who was a lawyer. It sounded like a cliche, but at that point, I was willing to take any help I could get. Her name was Sarah Klein, and her specialty wasn't family law, but financial litigation. Perfect. I met Sarah 2 days later in her small, neat office downtown. It was all glass and brushed steel, and it smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive coffee. Sarah herself was a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. She listened to my story without interruption, her face a mask of professional neutrality. I told her everything, the promise I made to my parents, the 2 jobs, the money transfers, the napkin calculations, the speech, the confession. I laid out the whole ugly story on her polished mahogany desk. Uncle Mark sat beside me, silent and grim, a solid, reassuring presence. When I was finished, I felt empty and exhausted, like I'd just run a marathon. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, tapping a pen against a legal pad. I had the sudden, terrible fear that she was going to laugh at me, that she would tell me I was a fool, that this was a family matter, that there was nothing she could do. Okay, she said finally, her voice crisp and professional. She looked me straight in the eye. First of all, I want you to understand that what your brother did is not just a moral failing. It's fraud. It's unjust enrichment. It's a textbook case of financial abuse. He didn't just betray you, he broke the law. Hearing it put so plainly, so clinically, was like a gut punch. I had thought of it as a betrayal, a heartbreak. She was calling it a crime. The word hung in the air between us. Crime. What can we do? I asked, my voice hoarse. We fight, she said, and for the first time, a small, fierce smile touched her lips. But we don't fight angry. We fight smart. We fight with paper. And so began the great excavation of my life. Sarah's instructions were simple and precise. I want everything, she had said. Every bank statement from the last 4 years, yours and his, if you have access. Every pay stub, every email, every text message, every scrap of paper where you discussed money. I want a timeline. I want you to write write down every single memory you have of conversations about his expenses, his needs, his supposed struggles, details, dates, times. I want to be able to wallpaper this office with the evidence of his lies. It was a monumental task. For the next 2 weeks, my apartment became a war room. I requested 4 years of bank statements from my bank, 4 years of pay stubs from my 2 employers. The paperwork arrived in thick, intimidating manila envelopes. I spread them out on my living room floor, a sea of numbers and dates. It was the story of my life in black and white. Deposits from the diner, deposits from the catering company, and then the withdrawals, the transfers. A steady, relentless stream of money flowing from my account to his. Week after week, month after month, year after year. Seeing it all laid out like that was staggering. The sheer volume of it, the consistency of my sacrifice. I had been a machine, a money-making machine for him. I created a spreadsheet just like Sarah had told me to. I entered every single transfer, the date, the amount, the reason I had given it, tuition payment, books and supplies, lab fees, rent for the dorm, emergency root canal. The lies were so creative, so specific. The root canal one particularly stung. I remembered that weekend. I had taken a grueling 24-hour shift at a film set catering gig to make the extra $2,000 he'd claimed he needed. I had subsisted on leftover craft services and slept for 3 hours in my car, all for a tooth that had never ached. The total was obscene. Over the 4 years, I had given him more than $180,000. My entire life savings, my entire income, beyond the bare minimum I needed to survive. It was the price of a house. It was a future, my future, and I had handed it over willingly. The process was brutal. Every piece of paper was a fresh wound. I would find myself staring at a transfer from 3 years ago and remember the exact circumstances. I remembered being sick with the flu, but dragging myself to my shift because Leo needed money for a specialized textbook. I remembered the worn-out soles of my work shoes that I'd patched with duct tape because a new pair seemed like an indulgence when my brother's education was at stake. I also started the timeline. I bought a stack of notebooks and started writing. I wrote down everything. Conversations over the phone, text exchanges I managed to recover from my old phone backups. I remembered him calling me, his voice tight with fake panic, telling me the university had threatened to kick him out if he didn't pay a past due balance immediately. I remembered the flood of relief and pride in his voice when I told him, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." I had been his hero, or so I thought. In reality, I was just his mark. While I was buried in paperwork, the rest of my family was mobilizing. The smear campaign began just as I knew it would. It started with Aunt Carol. She called me, her voice dripping with syrupy, false concern. "Honey, I'm just so worried about you," she began. "Your Uncle Mark told me you've hired a lawyer against your own brother. Don't you think you're overreacting? Leo is devastated. You've broken his heart. Did he tell you he stole nearly $200,000 from me?" I asked, my voice flat. There was a pause. "Well, he explained that. It was a misunderstanding. A series of miscommunications about a scholarship. He was going to pay you back. He has a great job lined up. You just have to be patient. This legal business is just going to ruin his future. Is that what you want? To ruin your brother's life over a little money? A little money." I looked at the mountains of paper on my floor. I thought about the youth I had lost, the dreams I had deferred. "Yes, Carol," I said, my voice cold. "That's exactly what I want." I hung up the phone. The calls kept coming. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called to tell me I was tearing the family apart. They'd all heard Leo's version of the story. His unstable, jealous older sister, bitter about her own lack of success, was trying to extort money from him now that he was on the cusp of greatness. He painted himself as the victim, and they, the gullible, drama-loving fools, bought it hook, line, and sinker. Each call was a fresh wave of psychological warfare. They attacked my character, my sanity, my motives. They used my sacrifices against me, twisting them into evidence of my instability. She was always so obsessed with him, one cousin told another, a story that got back to me through Uncle Mark. It was never healthy. I hit my rock bottom about 3 weeks into the process. I was alone in my apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of my past decisions. My phone was ringing, another unknown number, probably another relative calling to read me the riot act. The weight of what I was doing, of taking on my own family, my own brother, crashed down on me. The doubt that they had so carefully planted began to sprout. Was I the crazy one? Was I blowing this all out of proportion? Was I really about to destroy my family over money? I found myself staring at a bottle of cheap whiskey I kept under the sink for emergencies. I hadn't had a drink in 6 years, not since I'd decided that my own bad habits were a luxury I couldn't afford if I was going to support Leo. My hands were shaking. It would be so easy. Just one drink to numb the pain, to quiet the voices in my head. My hand was on the cap when my phone buzzed with a text. It wasn't a family member. It was Sarah. Just checking in. "How's the document review going? Remember, we fight with paper, not with poison. Call me if you need to talk." I stared at the text. Fight with paper, not with poison. It was so simple, so direct. It cut through the fog of self-pity and despair. She believed me. Uncle Mark believed me. I wasn't alone in this. I put the bottle back under the sink. I picked up my phone and texted her back. "It's going. I'll have the first batch of documents for you by Friday." That night, I started going to a support group for survivors of financial abuse. It was a small group of people who met in the basement of a community center. Their stories were all different, but the themes were the same. Trust betrayed, futures stolen, the slow, insidious creep of manipulation. For the first time, I felt truly understood. These strangers knew the specific shame and rage that came with being conned by someone you loved. They didn't tell me I was overreacting. They told me I was a survivor. They taught me the language of my own trauma. They helped me build a new support system, one not based on blood, but on shared experience and mutual respect. I was building my resilience, one meeting at a time. 2 days later, I walked into Sarah's office with a heavy banker's box. It was filled with organized, tabbed binders, bank statements, pay stubs, the spreadsheet printed out showing the relentless flow of money, the timeline, now over 50 pages long, detailing every lie, every manipulation. I placed the box on her desk. She looked at the box, then at me. Her professional mask slipped for a moment, and I saw a flash of genuine admiration in her eyes. "Well," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "this is a hell of a start. Let's go get your money back." The first official step was a demand letter. Sarah drafted a formal, terrifyingly legal document that laid out our case in stark, undeniable terms. It detailed the total amount of money transferred, the evidence of Leo's deception regarding the scholarship, and the legal definition of fraudulent misrepresentation. It concluded with a simple, non-negotiable demand: repayment of the full $184,721.53 plus interest within 30 days. If he failed to comply, we would file a civil suit. "This is the first shot across the bow," Sarah explained as I read the draft. "It puts them on notice that we're serious and that we have our facts straight. It also gives him a chance to do the right thing and settle this quietly. He won't, of course, but we have to give him the chance." She was right. He didn't. The response came not from Leo, but from a lawyer, a high-priced, downtown lawyer from a firm with 3 names lawyer. His name was Mr. Alistair Finch, and his letter was a masterpiece of condescending legalese. It denied everything. It characterized my financial support as a series of generous, unconditional gifts made between siblings. It accused me of being a disgruntled and emotionally volatile individual attempting to extort money from my successful younger brother out of jealousy. It was a character assassination in legalese. The letter was designed to intimidate, to make me feel small and crazy. And for a moment, it worked. Reading Finch's words, I felt that familiar, sickening lurch of self-doubt. Was this all in my head? Had I misinterpreted everything? "Standard tactics," Sarah said, waving the letter dismissively when we spoke on the phone. "They're trying to bully you into backing down. They're attacking your credibility because they can't attack the facts. The fact that they hired Finch tells me they're scared. He's who you hire when you have a lot to hide and the money to pay for it." Her calm confidence was a lifeline. "So, what's next?" I asked. "Next, we file," she said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "We take this out of the realm of angry letters and put it in front of a judge." Filing the lawsuit felt like stepping off a cliff. It made everything real, public, and irreversible. The complaint Sarah filed was a public document, a detailed account of Leo's betrayal. The family, which had been buzzing with rumors, now exploded. My phone, which I had started answering again, became a conduit for their collective outrage. The pressure campaign intensified. It was a coordinated effort, clearly orchestrated by Leo. The family was divided into 2 camps: the enablers, led by Aunt Carol, who actively attacked me, and the neutrals, who just wanted the whole thing to go away. The neutrals were almost worse. Their calls were full of sighs and pleas for peace. "Can't you just work this out?" a cousin pleaded. "You're tearing this family apart. Thanksgiving is going to be so awkward. Leo stole my life savings," I would reply, my voice tired. "That's already pretty awkward." Then came the offer. It wasn't a formal offer from his lawyer. It was more insidious than that. Uncle Mark called me, his voice heavy. "They want to have a family meeting," he said. "Just you, me, Leo, and Carol at my house. They say they want to resolve things." "It's a trap," I said immediately. "I know," he said, "but maybe you should go. Hear them out. It's important that we look like we're being reasonable." I agreed, reluctantly. Sarah had advised against any direct contact, but I trusted Mark. The meeting was an ambush. I walked into my uncle's living room to find not just Leo and Carol, but a half-dozen other relatives, all arranged on the sofas like a disapproving jury. Leo sat in the center, looking somber and wounded. He had perfected the role of the beleaguered victim. Aunt Carol, his self-appointed press secretary, opened the proceedings. "We are all here," she announced, "because we love you both, and we want to stop this madness." She then launched into a long, rambling speech about the importance of family, forgiveness, and forgetting. The subtext was clear. I was expected to do all 3. When she finally ran out of steam, Leo spoke. He didn't look at me. He addressed the room, his voice thick with false humility. "I know I haven't been perfect," he began. "I made mistakes. I was young. I was foolish. I should have been clearer about my financial situation, but I never, ever intended to hurt my sister." He then made his offer. He would pay me back a portion of what I had given him. He offered $20,000 as a gesture of goodwill, he said, to put this all behind us. $20,000. Less than 10% of what he had taken. It was a slap in the face. It wasn't a settlement. It was an insult. "There are conditions, of course," he added, his voice hardening slightly. "You would have to drop this ridiculous lawsuit immediately, and you would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We can't have you going around telling these stories." The room was silent. Everyone was looking at me, their faces a mixture of hope and expectation. They wanted me to take the deal. They wanted the problem to go away. They wanted their comfortable family narrative restored. I looked at my brother, at his handsome, lying face. I thought about the 17-hour days, days, the missed birthdays, the constant grinding exhaustion. I thought about the woman in the support group whose husband had drained their retirement account to fund a secret gambling addiction. I thought about the man whose son had taken out credit cards in his name and ruined his credit. I thought about what it meant to stand up not just for myself, but for every person who had ever been told they were overreacting, that it was just money. I stood up. "Thank you for the offer, Leo," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My counteroffer is this. I will see you in court." Then I turned to the rest of them, my family, my jury. "And for the rest of you," I said, my gaze sweeping across their shocked faces, "you have all heard his version of events. You have all listened to his lies and his character assassination. You have all chosen a side. So have I. I'm choosing mine." I walked out of the house, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. Uncle Mark followed me out to the car. "You did the right thing," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. That was impressive. "It was terrifying," I admitted. "I think I just excommunicated myself from the family. Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said quietly. "It seems to me you're building a new one." The lawsuit moved at a glacial pace. There were motions and counter-motions, filings and delays. Leo's lawyer, Finch, used every trick in the book to stall. He claimed Leo was too busy with his new, prestigious job at a consulting firm to be deposed. He filed motions to dismiss, arguing that my claims were baseless. Each one was a small battle, a war of attrition designed to drain my resources and my resolve. But Sarah was a bulldog. She met every motion with a counter-motion, every delay with a demand for sanctions, and we had the paper, we had the receipts, we had the truth. The investigative process, or discovery as Sarah called it, was where our case truly took shape. It was a slow, methodical peeling back of Leo's lies. We subpoenaed his university records. The documents arrived in a thick packet, and there it was, in black and white, the Presidential Merit Scholarship awarded to Leo at the beginning of his sophomore year. It covered full tuition, fees, and a stipend for living expenses. For 3 years, his education had been free. The confirmation was both sickening and validating. I wasn't crazy. The numbers on my spreadsheet, the transfers I had made for tuition, were pure profit for him. Next, we subpoenaed his bank records and credit card statements for the entire 4-year period. This was the real treasure trove. Finch fought it tooth and nail, claiming it was an invasion of privacy. The judge, an older, stern-faced woman who had clearly seen it all, was not impressed. "He's being sued for financial fraud, counsel," she said, her voice dry. "His finances are hardly irrelevant. Motion to compel granted." When the records arrived, Sarah and I spent a weekend in her office, poring over them, fueled by coffee and a grim sense of purpose. It was like watching a secret life unfold. We cross-referenced his statements with my timeline of transfers. The week I sent him $3,000 for emergency dental surgery, his credit card statement showed a charge for the same amount at a luxury resort in Miami. The month I worked 3 back-to-back weekends to cover his specialized lab equipment, he had bought a $2,000 watch. The most damning discovery was the trip to Ibiza. In the summer before his senior year, he had called me frantic. He said he had a chance to get into a highly competitive summer research program, but it had a hefty price tag. He needed $10,000. I sold my car, my reliable old Honda, and gave him the money. I took the bus to work for a year. His bank records showed a wire transfer to a travel agency, followed by 2 weeks of credit card charges from nightclubs, beach clubs, and high-end restaurants in Ibiza, Spain. There was no research program. There was only a party, funded by the sale of my only major asset. Seeing the proof, the undeniable black and white evidence of his parasitic existence, changed something in me. The hurt, which had been a constant, dull ache, began to recede. The rage, which had been a hot, burning fire, cooled into something harder and more durable. It became a cold, clear-eyed determination. This was no longer just about getting my money back. It was about accountability. It was about making sure that he, for once in his coddled, charmed life, had to face a consequence. We also found a witness. Sarah hired a private investigator, a former cop named Frank, who was remarkably good at finding people who didn't want to be found. He tracked down Leo's college roommate, Josh. At first, Josh was reluctant to talk. He was still friends with Leo, but Frank was persuasive. He showed Josh some of the evidence we had gathered, the scholarship letter, the bank statements. Josh finally agreed to give a statement. He confirmed that he knew about the scholarship. He said Leo used to brag about it, calling it his sister-funded lifestyle. He even had text messages from Leo, joking about the lies he was telling me to get more money. One text, sent from Miami, was particularly chilling. "Sis thinks I'm getting a root canal, LOL. Send more money." This was our evidentiary turning point. Josh's testimony and the text messages corroborated everything. It moved the case from a he said, she said family dispute to a clear-cut case of fraud. Leo wasn't just an ungrateful brother. He was a con artist, and we had the receipts to prove it. With this new evidence, Sarah and I had to make a strategic decision. We could continue on the path to a full civil trial, which could take years, or we could use this leverage to force a settlement. We also had enough evidence to go to the district attorney and press for criminal charges. We met in Sarah's office to discuss the options. "A criminal case would be a whole different animal," she explained. "The burden of proof is higher, beyond a reasonable doubt, and you would have less control. The state would be the prosecutor, not you. It would be emotionally brutal. They would put your entire life, your character, under a microscope." I thought about it. The idea of seeing Leo in a criminal court, of possibly sending him to jail, was tempting. It felt like true justice. But was it what I really wanted? wanted? Did I want to spend the next several years of my life mired in the criminal justice system? Did I want my family's dirty laundry aired in an even more public forum? What about the civil case? I asked. With Josh's testimony and the texts, our position is incredibly strong, she said. Finch knows it. They'll likely offer a much more substantial settlement now to avoid a trial. If they don't, I'm confident we would win in court. The question is, what do you want your victory to look like? It was the first time anyone had asked me that. What did I want? The money was a part of it, of course. It was my money, my past and my future. But it was more than that. I wanted him to be held accountable. I wanted the truth to be officially recognized. I didn't want him to be able to spin this, to tell people it was a misunderstanding. I wanted a judgment, a formal legal declaration that he had done this, that he was a fraud. I don't want to settle, I said, the words tasting of finality. I want to go to trial. I want a judge to hear this. I want it on the record. Sarah nodded slowly, a look of respect in her eyes. It will be hard, she warned. He will fight dirty. Finch will try to rip you apart on the stand. I know, I said, and I did. I had spent the last few months in therapy and support groups, building up my armor. I had learned grounding techniques. I had practiced telling my story over and over until the shame and the hurt no longer had the power to choke me. I had found my voice. Let him try. The trial date was set for 6 months later. The waiting was its own form of torture. Life continued, but it felt like I was living in a holding pattern. I got a new job, an office manager position with regular hours and benefits. It was the first 9-to-5 job I'd ever had. The stability was a revelation. I started taking a night class at the local community college, an introduction to small business management. I was slowly, tentatively, beginning to build a life that was my own. But the trial loomed over everything. As the date approached, the anxiety intensified. Finch's tactics became more aggressive. He deposed me for 2 full days. It was as brutal as Sarah had predicted. He sat across a long conference table, a picture of smug, expensive tailoring, and tried to dismantle my life piece by piece. He asked about my parents' death, implying I had a martyr complex. He asked about my own decision not to go to college, suggesting it was the source of my bitterness. He brought up a brief period of depression I'd gone through in my early 20s, trying to paint me as mentally unstable. Isn't it true, miss, he asked, his voice dripping with condescension, that you were desperate for your brother's affection? That you willingly gave him this money as a way to keep him dependent on you, to control him? I looked him straight in the eye. I pictured my therapist, my support group, my Uncle Mark. I planted my feet firmly on the floor, just as I had practiced. No, Mr. Finch, I said, my voice even. It is true that I loved my brother and wanted to help him. He exploited that love. That is not my failing, it is his. Sarah was brilliant. She objected. She protected me. But the questions were the point. The goal was to break me down, to make me so angry and emotional that I would seem like the hysterical woman they were trying to paint me as. I didn't let them. I stuck to the facts. I stuck to the paper. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. It wasn't a big, dramatic courtroom scene like on television. It was a bench trial, meaning it would be decided by a judge, not a jury. The courtroom was small and quiet. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah and Uncle Mark, who had insisted on being there. Leo sat at the defendant's table with Finch. He wouldn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. He looked nervous for the first time. Good. Sarah's opening statement was a masterclass in precision. She laid out the facts of the case simply and chronologically, without melodrama. She was a storyteller, and the story she told was of a calculated, long-term fraud. Then she began to present the evidence. It was a slow, methodical process. She entered into evidence my bank statements with the transfers to Leo highlighted. She entered his bank statements, showing what the money was actually spent on. She projected them onto a screen for the judge to see. On one side, my meager paychecks from the diner. On the other, his lavish expenditures. The contrast was stark and damning. She put the university registrar on the stand to testify about the scholarship. She put Josh on the stand to testify about Leo's bragging and the text messages. Finch's cross-examination was aggressive, but Josh held firm. The climax of the trial was my testimony. Walking to the witness stand was the longest walk of my life. I sat down, swore the oath, and looked at the judge. She was the same woman from the motion hearing, Judge Alani. Her face was impassive, but her eyes were intelligent and watchful. Sarah took me through my story. She had me identify the documents, confirm the transfers, explain the lies Leo had told me. It was painful, reciting the litany of my own gullibility, but I did it. I kept my voice steady. I told the truth. Then it was Finch's turn. He approached the stand like a predator circling its prey. He tried all the same tactics from the deposition. He tried to twist my love into obsession, my generosity into a need for control. You gave him the money, did you not? He asked, his voice booming in the quiet room. Yes, I said. Of your own free will? Yes. No one put a gun to your head? No. So these were gifts, were they not? Gifts from a loving sister to her brother? This was the heart of their defense. I took a breath. They were investments in his future, based on fraudulent information he provided me. I was not giving him a gift to go to Ibiza. I was paying for a non-existent research program that he told me was critical for his career. That is not a gift. That is fraud. Finch was taken aback. I had used their own legal language against them. He tried to recover, but the damage was done. He had overplayed his hand. He finished his cross-examination with a few more weak jabs, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew he had lost. Leo did not take the stand. Finch rested his case without calling a single witness. It was a tacit admission of guilt. There was nothing Leo could have said that would have helped him. The judge did not take long to deliver her verdict. She looked down from the bench, her gaze resting first on Leo, then on me. "This court has heard testimony and reviewed evidence that paints a deeply disturbing picture of familial betrayal," she began, her voice filling the courtroom. "The defendant, a young man of clear intelligence and privilege, undertook a deliberate and sustained campaign of deception against his own sister. He did not just accept her generosity, he actively solicited it under false pretenses, exploiting her love and her trust for his own selfish gain." She looked directly at Leo. "Your actions, sir, are not just a moral disgrace, they are a legal one. You have been unjustly enriched at your sister's expense, and you have done so through fraudulent misrepresentation." I felt a sob catch in my throat. Vindicated. The word, the feeling, was so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. The judge found in my favor on all counts. She awarded me the full amount I had requested, $184,721. She also, in a move that surprised Sarah, awarded punitive damages, an additional $50,000, as a penalty for the egregious and malicious nature of the defendant's conduct, and she ordered Leo to pay all of my legal fees. It was a total, unequivocal victory. But as the judge finished speaking and the gavel came down, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I just felt quiet. I looked over at my brother. He was staring at the table, his face pale and slack. He looked small, defeated. His future, the one I had sacrificed everything for, was now saddled with a $250,000 judgment. His brilliant career would begin in a black hole of debt. I had won. I had burned his world to the ground, just as I had promised, and all I felt was a profound, aching sadness. The victory was real, but it was bittersweet. It gave me my money back, but it could not give me back my brother. It could not erase the years I had lost. It could not heal the scar of his betrayal. Justice was served, but it was incomplete, and I was left to figure out how to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. The aftermath of the trial was quiet. There was no dramatic confrontation on the courthouse steps. Leo and his lawyer scurried out a side door. I stood in the sunlight with Sarah and Uncle Mark, feeling strangely numb. We had won, completely and utterly, but the end of a war doesn't feel like a celebration. It just feels like silence. "We did it," Sarah said, giving my shoulder a squeeze. She looked tired but exhilarated, the way a surgeon might after a long and difficult operation. "He'll appeal, of course, or Finch will, but it won't go anywhere. The judgment is solid." Collecting the money was another long, slow, procedural battle. Leo didn't just write a check. He didn't have the money. His fancy consulting job paid well, but not well enough to cover a $250,000 judgment overnight. So we began the process of collections, wage garnishments, liens on his assets, the car I had paid for, the watch I had funded. Every 2 weeks, a portion of his paycheck was automatically diverted to my bank account. It was a slow, steady transfusion, my lifeblood being returned to me drop by drop. I never spoke to him again. I never spoke to Aunt Carol or any of the other relatives who had sided with him. My phone fell silent. The family I had been so afraid of losing had, in the end, excommunicated itself. The silence was a relief. It was the sound of peace. The first check from the wage garnishment arrived about a month after the trial. It wasn't for much, just a few $100s, but I held it in my hands and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol. It was the first brick in the foundation of my new life. I didn't go on a spending spree. I didn't buy a new car or take a lavish vacation. The thought of it felt wrong, tainted. Instead, I sat down with a financial advisor, a kind woman Sarah had recommended. Together, we made a plan. I paid off the small debts I had accumulated. I opened a retirement account. I created a college fund for myself. That spring, I enrolled in the local university, the same one Leo had graduated from. I started with just 2 classes, nights and weekends, fitting them in around my new office job. Walking onto that campus as a student, not as a long-suffering benefactor, was a surreal experience. I was terrified. At 30, I was a decade older than most of the other students in my introductory classes. I felt like an imposter, but then something amazing happened. I loved it. I loved the lectures, the late-night study sessions in the library, the smell of old books. I loved the feeling of my brain waking up, of learning things not for someone else's benefit, but for my own. I was not just a launch pad. I was my own rocket. I continued with my therapy. My therapist, a wise and gentle woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, helped me process the complex emotions the verdict had stirred up. We talked about the bittersweet nature of my victory. "You were grieving," she told me in one session. "You won the lawsuit, but you lost a brother. You lost the idea of the family you thought you had. The judgment couldn't fix that. It could only validate the injury." She helped me understand that the emptiness I felt wasn't a sign that my fight had been meaningless. It was the natural aftermath of trauma. Healing wasn't about feeling happy all the time. It was about learning to live with the scars. It was about acknowledging the permanence of the loss while refusing to let it define my future. My new life was quiet. It was small. It was built on a foundation of firm, non-negotiable boundaries. I learned to say no. I learned that my well-being was not a negotiable asset. I learned that true family wasn't about blood. It was about respect, trust, and mutual support. My family was now Uncle Mark, who came over for dinner every Sunday. It was Sarah, who became a genuine friend. It was the women from my support group who checked in with me and cheered my successes. About a year after the trial, Uncle Mark told me that Leo had lost his job. The judgment had shown up on a background check. The prestigious consulting firm didn't appreciate the optics of employing a man with a massive fraud judgment against him. He was struggling to find work. He had moved back in with Aunt Carol. The old me, the caretaker, the martyr, would have felt a pang of guilt. The old me might have even felt a flicker of a desire to help him, but the new me just felt nothing. It was a distant story about a stranger. His choices had consequences. He was finally learning that. It had nothing to do with me. I established a final, permanent boundary. Through Sarah, I offered him a deal. If he would agree to a lump sum settlement paid out from a loan he would have to secure for a reduced amount of the remaining judgment, I would consider the matter closed. The condition was that he would also have to sign a permanent, legally binding no-contact order. He and the rest of his supporters were to be legally barred from ever contacting me again. It was a way of buying my peace. He took the deal. His parents-in-law, Tiffany's parents, apparently co-signed a loan to get me out of his life. It was the best money they ever spent. The day the final check cleared and the no-contact order was filed was the day I truly felt free. The last tie was cut. The war was officially over. Years passed. I graduated from college with a degree in business. I used the settlement money, my money, as a down payment on a small house with a garden. I started my own business, a small bookkeeping firm that helped other small business owners manage their finances. I was good at it. I understood the power of paper. I don't think about him much anymore. Sometimes a memory will surface unbidden, a childhood joke, the way he used to laugh, and for a moment, a ghost of the old sadness will return. The brother I loved died a long time ago, long before the graduation, long before the lawsuit. I have mourned him. I have moved on. The other day I was cleaning out an old box of photos and I found one of us. I was about 12. He was 9. We were sitting on the steps of our old house, arms slung around each other, grinning for the camera. We looked so happy, so innocent, a team. I looked at the picture for a long time. I thought about the girl in the photo, the one who believed in fairy tales and family loyalty above all else. I thought about everything she would go through, everything she would lose, and I felt a wave of compassion for her. She was so naive, so trusting, but she was also a survivor. She was stronger than she ever knew. She had to be, to get me here. I didn't throw the picture away. I didn't burn it. I simply put it back in the box and closed the lid. It is a part of my story, but it is not the whole story. It is a chapter that is closed. My life now is not a grand, dramatic epic. It's a series of quiet, happy moments. It's the smell of coffee in my own kitchen in the morning. It's the satisfaction of balancing a client's books. It's the feel of the sun on my face as I work in my garden. It's the quiet joy of a Sunday dinner with the family I chose. It's a life I built for me, and it is more than enough. And there you have it, the whole long, sordid, and ridiculously detailed story. If you're still here, if you made it through the depositions and the demand letters and the deep dive into my family's spectacular dysfunction, then honestly, you deserve a medal, or at least a very comfortable chair. I probably could have just said, my brother was a jerk and I sued him, but where's the fun in that? We had a word count to hit, people. So, from the bottom of my now financially solvent heart, thank you for listening. And hey, while you're here, feeling all vindicated on my behalf, maybe hit that subscribe button. It's free, and unlike my brother's college education, it's actually worth it.